let's think about loss and change. I do find that a very helpful place to start when we talk about loss is this classic book by Mitchell and Anderson. I'm seeing some nods in the room. How many of us have read this book, or it's on our shelf? Yeah, lots of us. It came out, I think, in '84. So it truly is a classic now. I continue to draw on it because I think there are some real pearls of wisdom in the book. And one of those pearls is this typology of loss that Mitchell and Anderson offer us. They are pastoral writers, and they, through their extensive work with people who have experienced all kinds of losses, they created this typology that we could think about loss as occurring in 6 different areas. Now, right off the bat, we want to say it's not an exhaustive list. We could come up with additional categories, I'm sure. And there's often overlap. So the same experience may feel like it could fit in multiple categories. But let's just walk through how they want us to invite us to think about these categories. The first area of loss is material loss. And they suggest that this is an area that sometimes people feel a little embarrassed about, or maybe a little ashamed of, because it's describing the loss of an actual material possession of some sort. And people can feel like, well, why am I upset about that? That's rather shallow of me, isn't it? To be upset that I've lost an important possession or an item. But it's all about the meaning of that possession or that item. If you lose something that was given to you by a beloved person who has died, that's going to have quite a lot of meaning for you. The family home. What happens when the family home is sold? That can be a very difficult experience for people. Not only because that gathering place is gone, the memories perhaps have to kind of get worked with, but also it can mean that perhaps someone has died and that's why it's being sold. Or perhaps someone is no longer able to maintain the home. So it can be connected with these other sorts of losses that can be challenging. The second kind of loss they describe is relationship loss. The loss of a way of relating to another person or to a group. So an obvious example of that would be death. When someone dies, we may still feel like we're in some sort of connection with that person, but the earthly relationship is over. Divorce, a ruptured friendship, or people just sort of kind of drifting away. You know how that can happen? You mean to stay in touch, you want to stay in touch, and you don't stay in touch. And suddenly you can be without that relationship. The third category, role loss, R-O-L-E, by which they mean the loss of a particular role or way of functioning in one's life. So retirement, as welcome as that can be, and I dream about it sometimes, it can still be quite challenging, right? We're so used, at least in this culture, we're so used to kind of relying on what we do as part of how we present ourselves to the world, you know? What happens when we're not doing that thing anymore? Parenting, when that starts to shift, children get older or they leave home. I certainly have talked with lots of parents who've said, when the kids leave home, there's no loss involved. It's all good. It's all cause for celebration. But for others, it can feel more complicated than that. Systemic loss. By this category, Mitchell and Anderson are describing the loss that an entire system or group or community might go through. It's not just an individual experience. So for instance, what happens in an office or a church work setting when one of the favorite colleagues moves or retires? What happens to a neighborhood when a certain family leaves. You know, maybe it's the family that always planned the get-togethers or the block party, and those parties don't happen anymore. What happens to a neighborhood when an important building comes down or a tragedy strikes? Systems, communities, groups experience loss as well. Functional loss, by this category, they are describing the actual loss to some part of the physical body, our physical being. So it might be through an accident, through illness, through stroke, etc., and suddenly one can't function in the way one was used to. It can also come through aging, and I sometimes hear from people that that is the hardest sort of functional loss that they have experienced. And I get that, because I feel like I'm there too. You know, once one part of aging starts to happen, we're on the road, and we know where it's headed. And so functional loss can be quite challenging. And it can be challenging to watch it in those we care about as well. And finally, they talk about intrapsychic loss, by which they mean a loss within our own psyche, a loss in terms of how we think about things, how we experience the world, how we think about ourselves. Okay? We've all had the experience, I'm sure, at this point, of realizing that something we might once have dreamt about doing is not going to happen because we've made other choices. Or it's too late, that window has closed. Now, we might be very happy about the other choices we've made, but that can still be an occasion of intrapsychic loss, needing to accept that that dream is gone. Coming to see ourselves in certain ways that we might not love seeing about ourselves, that can be an occasion of intrapsychic loss as well. Or the same thing with other people. I remember vividly when I was probably 9 or 10, the deep experience of what I could now call intrapsychic loss. I didn't know it at the time. But the loss I felt when I finally understood that my father was never going to be president of the United States. I remember it because what I had come to understand is that the president is the most incredible man, up till then it had always been a man. The most incredible man in the country gets to be president. Well, that was my father. And so, I just knew it was only a matter of time. But when it finally occurred to me that I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think people are going to know my beloved father in that kind of way. I remember the experience of loss. Here's another example from the important American poet Langston Hughes, his poem called Harlem. He's talking about what happens to dreams that don't come true. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? What happens if we find ourselves constantly dealing with intrapsychic loss for a variety of reasons? So I would also say that in my work with people in grief, and I'm imagining it might be true for some of you as well, intrapsychic loss is often the most common experience people are struggling with and the least recognized. First of all, because we're not usually used to thinking in these categories, but also, how often are we asked or invited to sort of reflect on those parts of ourselves or how we think about life or the world or God that maybe have felt disappointed or lost. You know, we don't get asked about that often. But that sort of, especially maybe if it's chronic intrapsychic loss, that can be quite costly. So, we want to be thinking about these types of loss today, and notice how much broader that is than death. We're used to thinking about loss as death. For some people, for varieties of reasons, death is not the most difficult loss. It could be some of these other experiences.